Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya. Jaya Vishnu Paramaha Kavaraj Acharya Asala Sisvati C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namachar Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Gaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasti Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gova Gopida Shama Kunda Radha Kudda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Gang Jamuna Tulasi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Go Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Deve Gauravani Prachalane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachare Shatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 10, Chapter 76, Verse 1. Shri Sukha Uvacha Atanyat Api Krishnasya Shrinu Karmad Bhutam Nrapa Krida Nara Sarirasya Yata Saubhapatir Hataha. Sri Sukha Uvacha. Sukadeva Goswami said, Ata, now, Anyat, another, Api, yet, Krishnasya, of Lord Krishna, Srinu, please hear, Karma, the deed, Adbhutam, wonderful, Nripa, O king, Krida, for playing, Nara, human-like, Sarirasya, whose body, Yata, how, Sobhapati, Lord of Sobha, Hata, killed. Translation, Sukadeva Goswami said, now, please hear, O king, another wondrous deed performed by Lord Krishna, who appeared in his human-like body to enjoy transcendental pastimes. Hear how he killed the master of Sobha. Salva was a friend of Shishupala's. When he attended the wedding of Rukmini, the Yadu warriors defeated him in battle along with Jarasandha and the other kings. Salva swore in the presence of all the kings, I will rid the earth of the Yadavas. Just see my promise. Having thus made his vow, the foolish king proceeded to worship Lord Pashupati, Shiva, as his deity, by eating a handful of dust every day and nothing more. The great Lord Umapati is known as he who is quickly pleased. Yet, only at the end of a year did he gratify Salva, who had approached him for shelter, by offering him a choice of benedictions. Purport, the Salva worshipped Lord Shiva, who was famous as Asutosh, one who was quickly satisfied. And yet Lord Shiva did not come to Salva for an entire year because, being Bhagavan, a great all-knowing personality, he understood that any benediction given to Lord Krishna's enemy would be fruitless. Still, as stated by the words, Sharanam Agatam, Salva had come to Lord Shiva for shelter and thus to maintain the standard principle that a worshipper receives a benediction. Lord Shiva offered one to Salva. Salva chose a vehicle that could be destroyed by neither demigods, demons, humans, Gandharvas, Uragas, nor Rakshasas, that could travel anywhere he wished to go and that would terrify the Vrishnis. Lord Shiva said, so be it. On his order, Mayadanava, who conquers his enemy cities, constructed a flying iron city named Shobha and presented it to Salva. This unassailable vehicle was filled with darkness and could go anywhere. Upon obtaining it, Salva went to Dwarka, remembering the Vrishni's enmity towards him. Salva besieged the city with a large army, O best of the Bharatas, decimating the outlying parks and gardens, the mansions along with their observatories, towering gateways and surrounding walls, and also the public recreational areas. From his excellent airship, he threw down a torrent of weapons, including stones, tree trunks, thunderbolts, snakes, and hailstones. A fierce whirlwind arose and blanketed all directions with dust. Thus, terribly tormented by the airship Sobha, Lord Krishna's city had no peace, O king, just like the earth when it was attacked by the three aerial cities of the demons. Seeing his subjects so harassed, the glorious and heroic Lord Pradumna told them, do not fear, and mounted his chariot. The chief commanders of the chariot warriors, Satyaki, Charudeshna, Samba, Akrura, and his younger brothers, along with Hardikya, Banu, Vinda, Gada, Sukha, and Sharana, went out of the city with many other eminent bowmen, all girded in armor and protected by contingents of soldiers riding on chariots, elephants, and horses, and also by companies of infantry. A tumultuous, hair-raising battle then commenced between Salva's forces and the Yadus. It equaled the great battles between the demons and demigods. With his divine weapons, Pradumna instantly destroyed all of Salva's magic illusions. in the same way that the warm rays of the sun dissipate the darkness of night. Lord Pradyumna's arrows all had gold shafts, iron heads, and perfectly smooth joints. With 25 of them, he struck down Salva's commander-in-chief, Juman, and with 100, he struck Salva himself. Then he pierced Salva's officers with 1 arrow each, his chariot drivers with 10 arrows each, and his horses and other carriers with 3 arrows each. When they saw the glorious Pradyumna performing that amazing and mighty feat, all the soldiers on both sides praised him. At one moment, the magic airship built by Maya Danava appeared in many identical forms, and the next moment it was again only one. Sometimes it was visible and sometimes not. Thus, Salva's opponents could never be sure where it was. From one moment to the next, the Soba airship appeared on the earth, in the sky, on a mountain peak, or in the water. Like a whirling, flaming baton, it never remained in any one place. Wherever Salva would appear with his Soba ship and his army, there the Yadu commanders would shoot their arrows. Salva became bewildered upon seeing his army in Aerial City, thus harassed by his enemies' arrows, which struck like fire and the sun and were as intolerable as snake venom. Purport. Srila Swami explains that the arrows of the Yadu commanders burned like fire, struck simultaneously from all sides like the sun's rays, and like snake venom were lethal by a single touch. So here we have the beginning of another pastime of Krishna in Dwarka, and that is the defeat of Salva. So it was explained at the beginning here. Salva had enmity with the Yadus. He was a friend of Jarasandha and Shishupala. So he was on the enemy side, and Krishna's mission was to destroy all of these enemies. Of course, he started with Kamsa, and then he worked on the others. So they were all on one side against the Yadus and the Pandavas. So the Lord's mission was to destroy all of these different enemies, and so one after one, this is what Krishna did. So in this case, Salva actually attacked Dwarka. Now, normally Dwarka could not be attacked because it was in the ocean and it was surrounded by high walls, and Krishna had especially meant that city to be protected from everyone, and that's why he moved away from Mathura, because Jarasandha was attacking that city, so he wanted a more secure place. So in general, Dwarka was more secure. However, we see that here Salva comes and he attacks the city. So he was very, very strong. And moreover, we see here that he got a benediction from Shiva, by which he got a special vehicle, a huge airship, which was very remarkable because it could move anywhere instantaneously from one place to another, and it could not be pierced by normal weapons because the material was completely different from any other material. So this, of course, was a material instrument or vehicle, just as we have airplanes and rocket ships made out of material elements. They're propelled by some sort of fuel, and they go from one place to another in the material world. So this was also a material vehicle, but more remarkable even than these modern spaceships or airships or airplanes or whatever. It was doing things that our modern airships could not do. That is, could go instantaneously from one place to another. In other words, cover space with not going there, it looked like, going from one place to another instantaneously. And it was made out of some remarkable material that cannot be pierced by normal weapons. So something very remarkable for us, but nevertheless material. It's a material instrument, a material vehicle, a material weapon. So obviously, against Dwarka, which is a spiritual city, against the weapons of the Yadus and against the Yadus themselves and Krishna, who are all spiritual, he didn't really have a chance. Nevertheless, we see a battle took place in which Pradyumna and others were fighting the soldiers, etc. So this is part of the Leela. So in this particular verse we see it was here this remarkable pastime in which Krishna performs pastimes as Nara Sarira. He has a body like a human being for his pastimes. Krida Nara Sarirasya. So the material weapons and material bodies can do nothing to the Supreme Lord and his Dhamma, which are all spiritual. But somehow or other looked as if something was happening here, because Salva was attacking very valiantly and fighting with his warriors, and then the Yadus had to fight back. So this is part of the pastimes of Krishna and his human-like body. It looks as if he is fighting matter with matter. He's material and he's fighting another material entity, when actually nothing can touch spiritual world. In other words, Salva cannot go to the spiritual world and fight there at all. He can't even enter there. So the Dhamma of the Lord also is spiritual, and actually Salva cannot enter there at all. He cannot touch any of the Yadus or Krishna. But it looks as if it's happening here, fighting, etc. Not the only case. We see so many fights take place between Krishna and the demons. So this is Nara Leela. Krishna acting like a human person. Now, of course, the other avatars of the Lord also act like this. So we see Varaha lifting the Bhumandala, which is material, obviously, out of the Garbhodak ocean. We see Ramchandra fighting with demons, etc., fighting huge battles with demons who have fantastic weapons and whatever. So also takes place with others as well. And it's all Leela. They're doing this for pastime, to illustrate to people in the material world, and even the devotees in the material world, the prowess of the Supreme Lord. But technically, people with material eyes cannot see the Lord, so they can't appreciate anything ultimately. Nevertheless, we see that these demons see Krishna. Shishupala could see Krishna, and he hated him, and he was cursing him and insulting him and whatever. So they can simultaneously see and not see. They see Krishna, but they don't really see the spiritual form of Krishna. But even that, seeing that material form of Krishna, or covered form of Krishna, has some benefit for the demons. And it's there so that Krishna can function within this material world and perform his pastimes. Otherwise, if Krishna comes to the material world, no one can see him, then where are the pastimes? Nobody can see the pastimes except those who are associated with him in his eternal Leela. So if Krishna comes to the material world with all of his eternal associates and he's having pastimes in Vrindavan, but no one else can see them, then what is that? So when the Lord comes to the material world, he interacts with the people of the material world by killing demons, etc., and accepting devotees. So there's a little bit of a mixture here between the material world and spiritual world when the Lord comes. When Krishna comes, then of course, it's a little more extraordinary, because Krishna acts even more like a human being than the other forms of the Lord. Rama kills demons, but we always know Rama is going to win because he has this extraordinary power. But sometimes in these battles we see Krishna looks like he's not going to win, and sometimes he runs away, as in the case of Jarasandha. He ran away from the battle like that. So Krishna's pastimes are even more human-like than those of the other forms of the Lord when they appear in this material world. Here he's attacking with his fantastic air vehicle, which is described here as bigger than a city. So at the present moment, that is very difficult for us to do. We can build big airplanes, but they have a certain limit, how the size. I suppose because the weight. The weight is too much, and then to make it fly up in the air and the fuel that it'll consume won't be practical, so we don't have, there's a limit on the size we can build our airplanes or whatever like this. This didn't seem to have a limit. It was not subject to the same laws for some reason. It was huge and therefore heavier in one sense, but nevertheless it was freely floating up there in the sky and darting all over the sky by some extraordinary means. So in other words, it was a very materially advanced vehicle beyond our capabilities. How is it possible? Because benediction of Shiva. So Shiva had Mayadanava build this special vehicle. Of course, a material vehicle, but under the direction of Shiva and Mayadanava, some very fantastic material vehicle was produced. So for us, it is amazing, but still it's material, subject to material laws and ultimately material destruction. But of course, because it is very advanced, very, very difficult to conquer. And we see later on how it appeared like magic somehow, and then Salva could use some magical powers almost to appear and disappear and create illusions, etc. So his material weaponry and fighting were advanced to a stage that he could create illusions. And people would think this, but it wasn't this, it was something else, whatever like that. So very advanced in terms of material powers and illusions. But nevertheless, nothing in comparison to spiritual world and the Shakti of the spiritual world under the control of Krishna. So, of course, as mentioned here, Shiva knew about this, and therefore he really didn't want to give a benediction to Salva because it was useless anyway, a weapon against Supreme Lord, because Shiva himself is a form of the Supreme Lord, and he's just here as Bhagavan. So he has all knowledge, and therefore he was reluctant to give that weapon, even though he's called Asutosha, or easily pleased. And usually he does give quick benedictions to people who worship him. But because he wanted to combat the Supreme Lord, he was very reluctant to allow this. However, he did it. Why? Not out of ignorance, because Shiva is also Supreme Lord. He's Sarvagya, he's all knowledgeable. But again, for pastimes, so that Krishna could display his remarkable activities in the face of this remarkable material opponent. So that's why it's called Adbhuta Karma here, very amazing activities of Krishna. Salva had amazing material powers through the benediction of Shiva. But all material. So Krishna had more amazing powers. So in one sense, Salva cannot even touch Dwarka in one sense, but again for pastimes he was allowed to attack and whatever like that, and they had fights and exchanges, etc. All for pastimes. And so the Lord can illustrate certain things to the demons and to the devotees. So in this way, Krishna interacted, and his devotees like Pradyumna interacted with Salva, and therefore we have this huge battle taking place. So as I said, there is material versus spiritual here, and no matter how much
a person can manipulate material energy. It's not remarkable for the Supreme Lord, because he's the one that causes everything in the material world. He is the ultimate controller, so he can do something with matter that even these demons cannot do. Salva can make a fantastic, or use a fantastic ship, which is created by Mayadanava under Shiva's direction. But that is just, again, a manipulation of material energy. And the ultimate person in charge of that material energy is the Supreme Lord himself. So he can do more remarkable things with the same energy if he wants to. And if Shiva can, Salva can have magical illusions or powers like that to make things appear and disappear, whatever. That again is material, having to do with our perception and whatever, and managing certain aspects of material nature. So, again, Supreme Lord can do more than that. He's got more power over material energy than Salva has. So on the gross level and the subtle level, the Supreme Lord can do much more than that with material energy itself, if he wants to. But, of course, Krishna is ultimately spiritual. So nothing can really combat the spiritual energy. The material energy is nothing in comparison to the spiritual energy. Material energy is achit. It is inferior. And in the first canto of Bhagavatam, it's described as that Maya cannot stand before the Lord. It's very ashamed because it's so inferior. Not so with the spiritual energy. Spiritual energy is part of the Lord himself, so it's called his Sarup Shakti. And it's through that spiritual Shakti that the Lord manifests his wonderful forms, qualities, activities, and pastimes in the spiritual world and creates bliss. So the Lord has remarkable powers, and this whole spiritual realm with its spiritual powers is inaccessible to material energy. Material energy can't really touch it at all. So if we have here Salva attacking the city of Dwarka and the devotees and Krishna there, actually cannot even do it, but for pastimes. The Lord allows this. So we see a nice interaction between the Supreme Lord and his spiritual Shakti and the devotees and the material energy with Salva trying to very cleverly use that material energy to defeat the Lord. But no match at all. That material energy can do nothing in the face of that spiritual energy of the Supreme Lord. Cannot even touch it, really. So ultimately this whole attempt of Salva is also useless, insignificant. So from Salva's point of view, he thought he was invincible with his huge ship and his remarkable powers. But for the Supreme Lord, nothing at all. It's his material, and the Lord is the controller of material energy. But ultimately the Lord has his spiritual energy, which is much, much superior to that energy. So material energy is achit, dead. Now we can use it in remarkable ways, but nevertheless it's dead. Spiritual energy is not dead, it is chit. It's quite different. It's a remarkable energy, quite different from this material energy. We can't even conceive of what it is. Of course, we can't even conceive of what material energy is. It's difficult for us to conceive of that with our dull material senses. But spiritual energy is more remarkable than that material energy. So that we see everybody in the spiritual world has remarkable powers. All of these persons in the spiritual world are endowed with all siddhis. So the yogi has remarkable powers. Here we see Salva has some remarkable powers of appearing and disappearing, etc. These are called siddhis. So all siddhis are naturally there with the devotees in the spiritual world. And of course all siddhis are there with the Supreme Lord himself. So that everyone has remarkable powers in the spiritual world. They can also assume any form and do anything and manifest any object or whatever. But it's all on the spiritual level, not even on the material level, so it's unlimited. Here, objects manifest whatever, like by magic or whatever, by solva, but it's all limited, material, dull, inert, unconscious matter. Spiritual world, it's all shit. So much more remarkable and fantastic what can take place in the spiritual world. And therefore all this display, it's an elaborate description here of all the remarkable features of this vehicle, just to show that ultimately all useless, insignificant in comparison with to the Supreme Lord and His powers. So this is another foolish attempt of the demons to combat the Supreme Lord. They try various means. So usually we find them fighting, and they have their huge armies, and they're fighting and fighting and fighting. Here we find a little bit different, with a huge airship comes along and attacks Dwarka and throws things on top of Dwarka and whatever, like modern warfare. But cannot harm the city, cannot harm anyone there at all. And Krishna can easily defeat this material machine. So in other words, it illustrates the foolish attempt of the Asura, thinking that Lord is another material entity. He tries to conquer him, but actually nothing in the material world can conquer the Supreme Lord. He's completely different from anything in the material world, so all attempts are ultimately foolish.
Jiva comes to the material world, like some devotees like Joy and Vijay. Do those take material bodies?
Do they take material bodies? Well, we can say it's a semblance to a material body, but ultimately they're not conditioned souls like us. Now, under the Yoga Maya potency of the Lord, they may think they're a material body and so like that, but technically they're not really conditioned like us. So it's all the will of the Supreme Lord. In our case, it's not the will, Yoga Maya. We actually have gross material ignorance, avidya. In the case of Jaya and Vijay, who came from the spiritual world, that's some arrangement of the Yoga Maya potency of the Lord. But it looks like ignorance because we find Hiranyakasipu is fighting, Hiranyaksha is fighting, Shishupal is fighting, so they identify themselves as demons at that time.
Their body also is spiritual, can you say?
Ultimately, yeah. So we can say that, or even if it is material, it's got nothing to do with their Atma, which is ultimately spiritual, and they have their spiritual body also.
And because, like, see here, Shalva, he got benediction from the Shiva, and he got vehicle, airship, which was material. And what about this? Kadmobin also, by mistake, he also made a vehicle.
Yeah.
So both are similar.
Well, yeah, but this was not because of his yoga power. It was because of benediction from Shiva that Mayadanava made a vehicle. Probably the one made by Kapila, Karima Muni, was more fantastic because it was more subtle. It was more subtle, done by pure yogic power. It was something very, very subtle.
What about manipulation from material energy? See, we know that this material energy is a passive, no consciousness. Okay, that's like almost like a death. Then how does that things work?
How
does the material is, if we think it is a death, it does not work. It's unconscious, correct?
Yeah.
But how is there is manipulation of material energy and doing so many mistakes things? How it is working?
Well, it's dead in the sense that it does not have consciousness that can say, I exist, or I perceive something, etc. It doesn't mean there's no energy there. Definitely it's an energy, it's Shakti. So the Shakti can, among its components, can do things in one sense. It can act, there's interactions or whatever. Of course, it also needs input from outside. So matter cannot do anything without the input of the Supreme Lord. So that's why Mahavishnu glances over Prakriti, then it becomes active. he injects it with this willpower, and then it begins to act. So only by the will of the Lord, material energy can interact and produce Mahatattva and Ahankara and all the material elements, etc. None of that can take place unless the will of the Lord is there. The energy of the Lord is somehow involved in that. So once we have a material world, then we also have jiva in the material world. This makes it a little more complicated because then we get bodies for jivas. And the body is very complex also. I don't know, maybe we can say the body is more complex than rocks or something like that, I suppose. More complex. We get a whole thing, cells in the body, all of this also material, but very, very complex arrangement of matter. Why? Because of jivas. So we got bodies in the material world, very complex forms of matter in relation to jivas. And then when the jiva goes up to the body, it disintegrates back into its elements again. So in combination with the jiva, we get very complex combinations of material energy. So that the jiva also has some, you can say, power there to help produce complex material arrangements or whatever. So there's energy in matter itself, but again, as I said, it's not completely independent. It's under the Supreme Lord somehow or other. And then also in relation to the jivas, it operates.
So can I say that? Can I say that, like, say, if you see the dead body, if there is no soul in the dead body, this body is useless. Similarly, in material energy, if there is just no spirit, the material energy doesn't work.
Yeah.
That energy is Lord Himself made it to work.
It makes it work. Yeah.
Yeah. So when Lord makes it to work, it's not material energy anymore. It is spiritual.
Well, it's related to the Lord, but we don't call it spiritual because its essential nature is achit, and it's completely dependent on the Lord. Now, we have spiritual energy in the spiritual world. We can say, okay, it's not the Lord also, but it's completely different because it is chit. It is conscious energy in the spiritual world. Here it's unconscious, so it's on a much lower level. Ultimately, everything is Supreme Lord because we say Achincha Veda Veda Tattva, but I guess we would differentiate Shakti from the Supreme Lord also. So the Lord is his Shakti, is simultaneously not his Shakti. He's different from it. And so we make some distinctions. On the highest level, the devotee will make no distinctions, and he just thinks everything is all part of Krishna. Well, not automatically, but and Krishna himself probably thinks like that. But for us, then we have to make some distinctions and between material energy, spiritual energy, and their different ways they interact, etc. Another part of matter, of course, is the subtle aspect of matter. We have the gross matter, and then we have time, karma, and activity. Karma in the sense of fate. These are subtle aspects of matter, not material world, not matter, gross matter, but subtle aspects of the material world. So this helps to create the idea of action and interaction, etc. If we don't have that Shakti there of time and the ability of action to lead to other actions, and the idea of karma for the individual, then we could say it would be much less active than it is. So these subtle aspects are there, which give us an appearance of all sorts of wonderful things happening in material nature. But it's also material, it's ultimate material world. And it's also achit. Time is achit, karma is achit, action is achit.